some key outcomes of the ClimInvest project, and discuss with 3 panelists from Norway, France, and the Netherlands the current status of physical climate risk management. I'm Karianne de Bruin, researcher at Wageningen Environmental Research, part of the ClimInvest team, and your moderator and panel chair today. I just checked, we're over already 60, going into the 70 participants from across the globe. Welcome. For the coming 1.5 hours, the agenda looks like this, with 3 blocks. We will kick off with a keynote and science update, move to a hands-on presentation by the ClimInvest team, and close with a panel discussion. On the practical side, we are recording the webinar. Only the speakers will be visible. All attendees are muted and cameras are switched off. We will publish the webinar afterwards online and share the link with all participants. If you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar. We're not sure we can address all questions live today, but we'll collect them at the end and make sure to get back to you. In short, what was ClimInvest about? We've been working across 3 different countries with different research institutions and different financial actors, with the objective to help investors respond to the task force on climate-related financial disclosures for physical risks, including looking into climate, physical and financial indicators, sector materiality, impact change linking climate and finance. And it was about shedding light on climate risk assessment services, the transparency of methodologies, about publicly available data, and looking into uncertainties and constraints of the different services. We were a consortium with 6 organizations, being CICERO, I4CE, Meteo France, and Carbon 4, Wageningen Environmental Research, and Climate Adaptation Services. The project was led by CICERO with project leader Christa Klapp, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. So ClimInvest brought together scientists and investors through a series of science practice labs to co-design tailored information on climate change to support financial decision-making in the face of physical climate risks and opportunities. We did this through a 3-step participatory approach to understand the needs of the financial institutions in terms of fiscal risk analysis, building capacity to understand the possibilities and limitations of such analysis, and co-design and co-develop climate services addressing these needs. If you'd like to get in touch with the ClimInvest team, please find the contact details here, as well as the project website. The project was funded by ERA4CS, the European Research Area for Climate Services, which is an ERANet initiated by GPI Climate. ClimInvest was not a standalone effort, as that many other projects and efforts contributed directly and indirectly to the project. Let's now move to the set of presentations. I first invite Christine Halvorsen, Director at CICERO and former Norwegian Minister of Finance, to give her keynote on climate risks and sustainable investment. Please go ahead, Christine.
Thank you so much, Karianne. So nice to see you again, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. And as Karianne already told you, I'm a previous politician, and I served as the Norwegian Minister of Finance from 2005 to 2009. And during my term, we introduced an expectation document on climate for the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund Global, and that is one of the world's largest fund and it's invested in more than 9,000 companies worldwide. We call it the oil fund. It's the revenue from the oil and gas production that goes into the fund. At that time, it's around 15 years ago, this was perceived as an action of idealism, something that came in addition to securing the financial return of the fund. But then after the Paris Agreement was signed by most of the world's countries in 2015, the financial sector and investors really have changed their priorities and attitude when it comes to climate change and climate risk. Climate risk is now high on their agenda. There is, of course, a political risk and a market risk connected to the transformation to a low carbon economy. But in addition to that, it's infrastructure and investments that are exposed to physical risk because of ongoing climate change that we have to handle, even if we succeed with the Paris Agreement. So today I'm the director of CICERO, which is Center for International Climate Research. We are based in Oslo. And a few weeks ago, we launched a seminar on climate risk on behalf of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Climate and Environment. And more than 500 people from the financial sector attended that seminar. And not only because of idealism, or not because of idealism at all, because today climate risk is as important to assess as any other financial risk. Climate change is important for business, and it's very important for profit too. So CICERO has several researchers involved in the next intergovernmental panel on climate change, the assessment report from IPCC. And from our research, we know that climate change hazards such as flooding and heat stress are increasing both in frequency and magnitude in many parts of the world. The cost of damage from these events are significant, increasing and expecting to escalate further in Europe and around the world. And an increasing portion of these costs are not covered by insurance. The financial sector is waking up to this risk, and central banks are also pushing for climate risk analysis and disclosure. But to implement climate risk analysis, financial actors need robust and tailored information. They face a confusing array of information from complex climate models and a range of service providers that are not always transparent on their methods and assumptions. So it's a responsibility actually. The research for the research community. The research community has a role to play, and to explain to the financial sector in adapting and communicating with what they know about physical risk more clearly to the public and the financial sector, of course. Bringing climate experts and financial experts together can improve the understanding and assessment of physical risk. Actually, there is a newsletter from Bloomberg that I received today, and they asked for exactly this kind of information, tailored information, easy to understand. And this was precisely the goal of the ClimInvest project, to bring climate experts and investors together to improve the information and tools available to assess physical risk. Today's webinar will provide an update on the latest science, share tools developed with input from investors in our research projects, and offer perspective from different investors across 3 countries. So this is very timely and of great interest to many people, and I wish you all the best with today's webinar and with the project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. I would like we now move to the science update on drought in Europe by Anne-Sophie, who's a researcher at CICERO. Please go ahead with sharing your slides and starting your presentation.
Yes. Just 1 second. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Karianne, and thank you, Christine. So after hearing the political perspective of Christine, I would like to bring the perspective from climate scientists, because as Christine said, even if now the financial center has realized that they need to think about the physical climate risk, us as climate scientists, we can also bring the perspective on how we should estimate or derive this climate risk. And that's the topic of my presentation. And to illustrate that, I will talk about drought. So first, let's take a step back. So first, what do we see today? So as Christine just said, we see extreme weather and climate events, such as floods, the Arctic ice is melting, we see forest fires in different regions of the world. And of course, these climate events or climate hazards have physical impact on nature, on the population, on biodiversity, and of course, in our case, on different assets. And the physical impact on these different assets has financial impacts also. And that's why the financial sector needs to take the climate hazard and the climate risk into account. One more thing I think to remember and to take in account is that even if we see some climate impacts now, they won't necessarily be the same tomorrow. Because as you see on this figure, which shows global mean temperature change between 1900 and 2100, if you look at the black line, you see that the global mean temperature is increasing. And of course, this has some climate impacts. But this impact is projected to continue if you look at the red curve, and this physical change, this increase in temperature will bring some additional risk, and we need to take this additional risk in account. So now, once we have thought a little bit about the background, how do we derive the risk? How do we estimate this physical climate risk? Well, we can use the IPCC framework, which says that the physical climate risk is a combination of climate hazard, the exposure of your asset to this climate hazard, and the vulnerability of your asset. So for example, for climate hazard, I've already mentioned a few of them, like drought, heat wave, or floods. And in this case, I will focus on drought. So for estimating, for deriving this climate hazard, we can use indicators. And for different sectors, we will use different indicators, but in this case, I will only use one. So the length of drought events. And to derive it, you can use this definition, which is the maximum number of consecutive days when daily precipitation is under 1 millimeter per day. So now that we have estimated our climate hazard, we can think about exposure. So the exposure to this climate hazard. And you can have some spatial maps, like this map, which is the length of drought events over Europe for the year 2020. And if you look at the warmer colors, yellow, orange, and red, you can see that Southern Europe is already more exposed to long drought than Central or Northern Europe. So that's not something really surprising, but it's still interesting to know. But what's even more interesting is maybe to look at what will happen in the future or could happen in the future. So if we look at the projected changes of the length of drought events over Europe, and for 2040 compared to 1990, and again, looking at these warmer colors, orange, yellow, and red, you can see that Southern Europe will be exposed to long drought events, but slowly it's also moving towards Central Europe and Eastern Europe. And for some sectors like agriculture, I think it's something very important to know and also to prepare for. So if you remember one of my previous slides, I said that the physical climate risk is a combination of the climate hazard, the exposure, and vulnerability. So we have already talked about the climate hazard and the exposure, but not about vulnerability. So to estimate vulnerability, vulnerability depends on two things in our case, the sector sensitivity and the adaptive capacity. So for example, for drought, we can think about agriculture. Agriculture is very sensitive to droughts. And then we can think about the adaptive capacity. And the adaptive capacity, it's important because you can do something on adaptive capacity. If you increase your adaptive capacity, you have a chance to decrease your vulnerability. So in the case of agriculture, you could implement irrigation or improve your system of irrigation. And in this case, you would improve your adaptive capacity and maybe decrease your vulnerability. So if you have to remember two things from this presentation, the first one is the physical climate risk. It's not only about the climate hazard. It's also about the exposure of your asset to these climate hazards and the vulnerability of your asset. The second thing that is also important to remember is that as I have said before, the planet is warming, and we'll see also an increase in emissions. And we see it again with this black line here showing the increase in historical emissions. But for the future, the past is not written yet. We have different options that are shown with this line with different colors. We have a more pessimistic path with the red color. We have a more optimistic path with the blue line, and other choices in the middle. But depending on the path we choose, there will be an additional risk that will be higher or lower. So if we go towards the red line, we go towards higher risk. And if we go towards the blue line, we go towards lower risk. And I think that's something very important to remember, that we have a choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Sophie. The following brief presentation provide an overview of some of the hands-on work done through the ClimInvest project on flood risk, heat stress, and screening of climate risks. Felix, climate adaptation and visualization expert at Climate Adaptation Services, will start. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Karianne. So my name is Felix van Veldhoven. I work for Climate Adaptation Services, or CAS. We specialize in climate change adaptation and in bridging the gap between climate science and adaptation action. Honored to be here. Good afternoon to you all. And I'll be presenting a case study, which is The Wall, a shopping center in the center of the Netherlands, about 65,000 square meters. And we will use this case study in showcasing a high-level physical climate risk assessment. And we've used it to demonstrate to the asset owner and the asset manager what data is and is not available, and kickstart a discussion with them about what the science can and cannot do. Now, the underlying aim of this case study was to learn how we can tailor climate change information so that it can support financial decision making. So in this case, for the real estate sector, for real estate owners and managers. And this case clearly demonstrates, I think, how we try to visualize these impact relevant indicators. And then, of course, the question is, what is impact relevant, or what is decision useful? In the next couple of minutes, I hope to be able to show you what visualization and mapping of climate data can do when you try to translate climate science into actionable knowledge and information for investors. So first of all, where's the data coming from? This is a snapshot from the Dutch Climate Impact Atlas, which provides free and open data in the Netherlands. And the aim is to provide a level playing field for risk assessments like the one that I'm showing right now. And it's funded by the Dutch government and kept up to date by CAS, by us, but also with this network of Dutch research institutes. So the Dutch Royal Met Office, KNMI, but also organizations like the PAS and Wageningen Environmental Research. And we deliberately used open data for this case, since the ClimInvest project clearly demonstrated that investors have a need for more transparent information. So transparency on the data and the methods. Often they are carried out with proprietary models and platforms, but we really try to push for openness and transparency. So we shared the data and the methods as well. Now, to dive into it, this is the shopping center that I mentioned, sitting in the middle of the Netherlands, next to the A2 highway, in between Amsterdam and Utrecht. It was sold in 2018 for almost 50 million euros, and the climate risk assessment was carried out the year after that, so in 2019. And this is an example of an excerpt of this climate risk assessment or stress test. What you see here is pluvial flooding, or flooding originating directly from rainfall, from extreme rainfall events. And climate change is expected to increase both frequency and intensity of events like this, of extreme rainfall, that primarily happen during the summer period in the Netherlands. And the map that you see right now shows the maximum water depth after a 2-hour extreme rainfall event. So this is an event that's quite rare. It will happen, it's estimated to happen once every 100 years. So you could say once in a lifetime. And the inundation depth that you can see here in these shades of blue for this asset is estimated between 20 and 30 centimeters of water. Now, climate change is estimated to double the risk, so that the flooding as shown on the map may happen twice as much towards mid-century. Now, after looking at the data, we had a discussion with the technical manager and the owner of the assets and discussed, well, are there any technical installations like the ventilation system or water and sewage system? Are they located in the basement stories? So that we could use local knowledge to understand the vulnerability of the assets. And that's an important point that was made earlier. It's also about asset-specific features, asset level adaptation measures, and also the resilience of the surrounding area that determines climate risk. So apart from pluvial flooding that I have been showing, we also looked at heat and drought, and that is available on the ClimInvest website. For now, I just wanted to quickly summarize the lessons learned from this case. So of course, physical climate risk and doing an assessment like this is very complex, and it is local by nature. And the discussions we had with the asset owner and the managers pointed towards a tiered approach, where you would first do a quick scan using open data and aim for transparency on data and methods. So where's the data coming from and by whom it was produced? Then you look at the red flags. So then you can start the discussion using the local data and local knowledge to get a grip on climate risk. Now, I hope that I've shown you that visualization and visualizing information like this can support the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Felix, for your presentation. We now move to Violain, manager at Carbon4, who will provide insight into heat stress and the agricultural sector. Please go ahead, Violain.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen, my slides?
It's not yet on presentation mode.
Is it now?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you, Karian. I'm Violain Lepouzet from Carbon4, consultancy specialized on climate change based in Paris. So I'm going to present quickly a simple climate risk assessment of an agricultural investment portfolio. So as everybody knows, agriculture is one of the most exposed sectors to climate change because crop production can be directly affected by bad weather conditions. So heat stress, drought, floods will impact directly the growth of the crops, but also all the logistics around the fields, for instance. So in this case study, we had really few information on the portfolio itself. We had the location of the fields and the value of the investment. So it was a portfolio mainly focused on Eastern Europe, but we had no information on the crops that were actually produced in the fields. So we decided to run a hazard exposure assessment focused on heat stress. And to do so, we use a generic climate indicator, that is the number of days where the temperature exceeds 30 degrees. So why choosing this generic indicator? Because the IPCC says that 30 degrees is a critical threshold for many crops. And as we had no information on the different type of crops, we decided to use this generic climate indicator. But if you have more information on the type of crop, you can use crop-specific indicator with specific thresholds. So in this case study, we focus on heat stress, on 2050, and on this particular portfolio. You can see the main results here, actually. So on the left side, you have the map showing the frequency of hot days on average for the reference period of 1990. So from yellow to red, you have a number of hot days. So you can see that, of course, it's warmer in the southern part of Europe. And you can see on the right side, the same data, but for 2050. So you can see that it's getting warmer, especially in the southern Europe. The dark dots are the location of the investments. So we can combine the two information to create some aggregate indicator at the portfolio level. So we combine the exposure of each asset to the hot days and their value, the value of the investment itself. And we can create this kind of easy to read information where you can see the proportion of the portfolio that is exposed to a certain threshold of hot days. And for instance, here for the reference period, we had 10% that was exposed to more than 10 hot days per year and 22% in 2050. So this is really basic information on the level of exposure of the portfolio to heat stress. So quite easy to run the hazard exposure assessment. Of course, it does not provide quantified estimation of financial impacts, but it provides useful information to understand the general level of exposure of the portfolio to this hazard and to identify the hotspot, the most at risk investment, where you can start engaging with the partner or doing other kind of risk management policies. This is it for this easy hazard exposure assessment.
Thank you, Veerle. Thanks for your presentation. We now move to Julia, researcher at Cicero, who will continue with a presentation on the interactive online platform set up by the ClimInvest team. Julia, please go ahead.
Thanks, Karianne. I will share my screen really quickly. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Karianne, and to the other speakers. I'm Julia Marginian. I'm a climate researcher at Cicero. And I will give you a brief introduction in the online climate indicators platform that we have developed in the ClimInvest project. But before we go into specifics, I would like to give you a little bit of the context and the main reasons and the process for why we decided to develop such a platform. So in the consultations with financial actors during the science practice labs in the ClimInvest project, we have learned that one of the main challenges that you are facing are related to data, and not necessarily data availability, but mostly data accessibility and reliability. Also, we learned that it is increasingly important for financial actors to get access to higher and higher resolutions for climate data. And while there's a plethora of climate data available out there, it is very difficult for someone with, who is not a climate scientist to understand its usability and navigate through the diversity of what is available out there. So to give you a little bit of the background of what climate scientists do, to reach this data is that we run global climate models, or GCMs for short, or regional climate models, RCMs for short, in order to extract climate variables that tell something about climate conditions in a certain period of time or a different location. Climate variables such as humidity, temperature, precipitation, these letters that you can see here on the chart. So with these climate variables, they tell a lot about climate conditions in a certain location or time period, but they need to be post-processed in something that we call climate indicators in order to really assess the impacts of these climate conditions. So in the ClimInvest project, we use data from regional climate models to look at the localized or more localized climate conditions, and we translated them into impacts, into indicators to look at the impacts in different sectors. Now, as I said before, climate scientists run climate models, and for historical climate conditions, we compare the outputs from these models with different observational data, such as from weather stations, for example, or satellite imagery and so on, to assess the model fit. But for the future, however, we use something that we call scenarios, which are different narratives. In this case, for example, for the future emissions. And these are scenarios for future emissions are called representative pathways. If we look at this image from that was published in the 5th assessment report of the IPCC, it was published in 2014. And if we look 6 years later, so in the very short or near future, we can see that the climate conditions are mostly dominated by the natural climate variability model spread and very little dominated by scenarios. However, if we move a bit further in the future, in 2040, for example, we will see that the scenarios are much more represented and increasingly represented the further we go into the future. Now for the CleanInvest indicators that we calculated and are available on the platform online, we chose to look at the worst case scenario, or something that we call RCP 8.5, for mainly 2 reasons. One of the most obvious is to provide an opportunity to prepare for the worst possible situation. But also, if you remember Anne-Sophie's slide with the different scenarios and pathways, until this point in the not very far future, more optimistic scenarios intertwine with more pessimistic scenarios, as well as with the natural climate variability. So it is really uncertain what to expect from the near future when it comes to climate change. Now, on the CleanInvest online platform that you received the link together with this invitation, as I said earlier, we have calculated these hazard indicators for the different hazards, and we used climate variables from regional climate models to do these calculations. Afterwards, we have plotted these indicators on exposure maps at a resolution of 10 kilometers to be able to understand the local conditions and assess at really high resolutions what is the risk for different hazards. And as Anne-Sophie also pointed out, and Felix as well, vulnerability is case specific. So this is a vulnerability assessment is something that you, the investors, will have to do on your own. But the online platform of the CleanInvest project provides a set of case studies that will help you navigate and ask the right questions. So now I will try to give you a brief overview of the platform itself. This might take a little bit to switch, but please bear with me. All right, I hope you can see the platform.
That's good.
Great. So the main points here are that the online CleanInvest platform is divided in 3 main sections. The background information gives you some an overview of the project and also who the partners are. But perhaps the most interesting section is the second section that provides an overview under the first tab here, provides an overview of the basic climate modeling notions that you should have in order to use the platform, also how the indicators have been calculated, and a brief overview of the 3 climate hazards that we have looked into. You can see drought here, heat, and then there's flooding, the next one. Under the 3 tabs up here, you can find the data that is relevant for each indicator. So in the case of heat stress, for example, we can look at the mean summer temperatures in 2020 and also changes between 1990 and 2040. And if the name of these indicators don't tell you very much, you can go up here at the legend and get a full description of what this indicator represents with units, and also the legend of the map to understand what the different colors mean. what is really interesting about the data available on this platform is that for each indicator, the resolution is quite high. So you can really see here in the case of Amsterdam, for example, that different areas of the city are influenced by different temperatures. Now, under all indicators map tab, you can see a list of all the indicators that we have calculated in the ClimInvest project, both for with data from 2020 and the changes over time between 1990 and 2040. The third part of the ClimInvest platform gives an overview of the 4 case studies that we have looked at. One on the agricultural sector that Violen just presented, the real estate asset presented earlier by Felix, and 2 more, one on the transportation sector in Norway, and another one on the real estate sector in France. Now I will go back to my last slide. Perfect. So as we saw, the platform contains a lot of information and data, but in addition to,
hey,
can
Julia,
you see my screen?
Yeah, can you just go to display settings and change?
Oh, let me try one more time. Apologies. Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, all right, perfect. Yeah, so as we saw, there's plenty of information and data on the available on the platform, and I encourage you to explore it some more. But to this, this platform only tells part of the story. So we looked at the mostly at the climate aspects, physical climate and vulnerability aspects on the platform. But you can add, you as investors and financial actors can add to this information to really do a risk assessment for your own portfolios and assets. So for exposure, for example, if you have the asset location and you know the hazards that your assets are exposed to, if you add the monetary value, that will help you answer questions like how much money is really potentially affected by certain hazards, or how much money is exposed from certain hazards. Now moving on to sensitivity, when you look at your asset sensitivity, you should ask how much would it cost in case a hazard would hit your assets and portfolios in the current state as they are today. Also, it is important to compare this cost of damage with how much it would cost to implement certain adaptation measures and reduce your vulnerability. And this can also provide opportunities for investment, both to minimize risk and to gain future capital. So I will give the word back to Karianne now. Thank you so much for your attention, and please reach out to us with any further questions.
Thank you, Julia, for your presentation. So we move to the last one of the ClimInvest team. Early February, we actually published a project capstone report synthesizing practical lessons from the ClimInvest project. Romain, project manager at I4CE, will provide us with an overview of the remaining challenges and the way forward. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Karianne, and thank you all for attending this webinar. Can you hear me and can you see my screen?
Yes, but if you, yeah, do that.
It's better?
That's okay. Yep, that's good.
Perfect. So I am Romain Hubert, project manager at I4CE Institute for Climate Economics, and I'm now summarizing in 10 minutes the lessons from 3 years of collaboration in the ClimInvest project, including the remaining challenges that we identified and proposals to address them. So just a little bit of context here. We drew the lessons on the challenges and the proposals for further action, building on the feedback from 12 of the participating financial institutions, but also from the ClimInvest consortium partners. Today, I'm going to present very briefly some key messages, but you can find more detail in the project capstone report that is indicated here. So at the beginning of ClimInvest, we identified 4 major challenges on fiscal climate risk management, and it made the whole task sound very daunting. But the good news is that over the last 3 years, we demonstrated that these challenges are not totally insurmountable, and we actually see some financial actors starting to manage the risk already. So let's start with challenge number 1, the tragedy of the horizon. So it's the mismatch between financial decisions that focus on the short term and the idea that climate impacts will materialize only in longer term horizons. So financial actors may end up thinking that this does not require immediate attention. But in context of the ClimInvest project, we clarify that there is already substantial costs that are materializing because of climate impacts. And some of the banks participating in the project also explained that they have strategic interest in looking at the longer term. Challenge 2 is related to the fact that financial institutions rely on external service providers to do the analysis, but they say that their tools are a black box on some of the key methodological choices. So basically they can't use the results for their decisions. But in context of the project, we reached out to some of the service providers, and they actually kindly accepted to increase substantially the transparency on some of the key methodological choices. So now this momentum needs to be sustained. The third challenge is that fiscal climate risk analysis requires a lot of data on climate conditions, but also on the portfolios of financial institutions. And it's really difficult to target what is the relevant data and then to access the relevant data. But in context of the project, we showed that there is a lot of climate data that is already available out there, and the climate experts can provide valuable guidance on their use. On the side of portfolio data, it's a little bit more complex, let's say. But the banks also clarified, for example, that they could rely on engagement strategies with their counterparties to help collect the data. The last challenge is that financial actors want to estimate the financial impacts from fiscal climate risk because it's the type of information they use to manage financial risks. But in case of fiscal climate risk, it really represents a large field of research, and in practice, the quantification process can be very data intensive. But some of the points from the ClimInvest project is that we see that quantification is not always vital for managing the risk. Some of the banks explain that they can already rely on some qualitative scoring methodologies and engagement strategies to start manage the risk. So this project really provides encouraging results about the potential of the financial actors to manage fiscal climate risks. But we also need to admit that a lot of work remains necessary for effective climate risk management across the financial sector. So the 12 financial institutions that we surveyed at the end of the ClimInvest project mention their own remaining needs. They are summarized in the table here. And you can see that their needs spread across the whole risk management process. So first, in terms of raising awareness, there is still a need to convince some of the teams at financial institutions that climate risk can be a material risk for their own portfolio. The teams also need to build further expertise for the next steps of the process. So in terms of analyzing the risks, some of the financial institutions seek to internalize the analytical process, others seek to rely on external service providers, but in both cases, they need to extend the scope of their analysis. They also need some technical guidance to prioritize the risks they should look at and also to identify the appropriate data. The data needs per se concern all types of aspects, and the financial actors are also clear that the climate data should cover not only the long term, but also the short term. And they are even interested in historical data, typically to calculate the correlation between observed climate hazards and financial losses. There's also a need to make the analytical process more decision useful. So financial actors are paying increasing attention on the quality and the harmonization of the underlying data. They also renew their need for clarity on the key methodological choices, and they explain that formatting of the final fiscal climate risk information is also important to make it more decision useful. Typically, if you have a fiscal climate risk score of 8 out of 10, it's definitely more useful if it goes with explanation on the severity of the impacts that it represents. So as a lot of work remains, we also make recommendations on priority actions based again on the ClimInvest feedbacks. And the first thing that comes out is that the financial actors have a major role to play, and they should start by mobilizing their own teams. So there is a consensus in the ClimInvest project that involving the risk as well as the ESG divisions is necessary, because they can have very different issues in mind and also be complementary in proposing the solutions. There's also a consensus that the best way to get started is learning by doing. So concretely, the financial institutions should start with organizing pilot risk assessments on their institution portfolio. It really helps to understand that physical climate risks are material on the institution portfolio. And it also helps engage with the different relevant teams on their practical needs, on their difficulties, and also on how they could contribute with the analysis. The financial actors can also rely on diverse resources to help build capacity and to organize their pilot fiscal climate risk assessments. So you have different publicly available resources online, and it includes the ClimInvest resources that are listed here on the right. So typically it includes explanation on the requirements of fiscal climate risk analysis, also explanation of the available tools, data use cases, and other practical tips. So this figure is only a screenshot, but you can find a clickable version towards the actual resources. And this clickable version is included in the report that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. We also see that to move forward quickly, the financial institutions will also need help from a broader set of stakeholders. Typically on the side of climate experts, the service providers should continue to increase their scope of analysis and also collaborate with the financial users to target the relevant details that are needed on their methodological choices, and also to tailor the outputs to the needs of the users. Also, the identification and the collection of the relevant data could be facilitated with the participation of different stakeholders. It could include, for instance, the insurance companies, municipalities, or non-financial companies. The financial actors also recommend that one authority centralizes the counterparty and the climate data, and they further recommend that some organizations take in charge the standardization and the quality check of the data. And last but not least, there is a need for sustained action of the regulators and supervisors on fiscal climate risk. It's definitely important to make sure that the risk managers keep this subject on top of their priorities. So it can be done, for example, with supervisory expectations, but also with pilot climate stress test exercises. It's also important to stimulate, for example, non-financial companies in providing the relevant data, and regulators can rely on mandatory disclosure requirements for that. So it's only a few examples among other key messages. You can see more detail in the paper, and I will be happy to discuss everything in more detail afterwards too. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Romain. And thank you to the ClimInvest team and the CICERO colleagues for your presentations. If you could unshare. Thank you. And now we're moving to the final part of the, let's see if it works. Yes. We're moving to the final part of the webinar, our panel discussion on physical climate risk assessment in practice, with insights from 3 financial actors in Norway, France, and the Netherlands. The Kliminvest work has shown that there's not one financial actor, but that there's numerous different actors with different viewpoints, mandates, and timelines they concern about. We're happy to have 3 financial actors in our panel this afternoon that bring in different perspectives from a local savings bank, a cooperative banking group, and an asset manager with a specific focus on real estate. From Norway, Caroline Bakker-Hjertaux, welcome. From France, Delphine Bartre, welcome. And from the Netherlands, Dirk Welling, welcome. As a start, I would like to invite you, each of you, to introduce yourself and provide some insights into the perspective of your organization on dealing with physical climate risks. What has been your experience to date? What are challenges, successes you would like to share? Please go ahead, Caroline.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And I'll try to be concrete and give some examples from practical life in a fairly small but moderately sized Norwegian saving bank. My name is Caroline Bakker-Hjertaux, and I work as head of sustainability in my bank. That means that I try to get everyone else to work on sustainability because I'm the sole responsibility officer in my bank. So the involvement of the rest of the bank is absolutely necessary for us to move forward. And to answer your questions, Christian, Karianne, I like the Kliminvest division into risk awareness, risk analysis, and risk management. And I'll try to, the 2 first of them have been the most challenging for us. First, for the bank, I'll try to, when it comes to the risk awareness, I'll answer a bit on behalf of the bank and a little bit on behalf of Norway as well. And really understanding physical climate risk as a financial risk has been maybe the most challenging when it comes to risk awareness for us. Because when it comes to transition climate risk, it's been easy for the bank to understand, but when it comes to physical climate risk, it's more difficult to understand that as a financial risk. And one of the reasons for that is that most of the natural damages are covered by insurance. So I had a meeting preparing for this panel discussion yesterday with our subsidiary, our insurance company, Fremtind, and they absolutely agreed. And they said climate risk is first and foremost at the present moment a risk for us. So for the bank, they take some of the risk for us. And then, like Kristin Halvorsen was saying, when is that gonna change? That is a risk in the future. An overall physical climate risk assessment for the bank, we're saying with the risk assessment team and our bank, we have done scenario analysis also on physical risk for specific sectors. We haven't identified the climate risk, mostly in agriculture, and some also in the corporate and retail buildings. And we do also an assessment in most loan projects, all of the loan projects where we assume there is physical climate risk. We do an assessment, an ESG assessment, where we ask if physical climate risk has been assessed. So we've been doing that since 2019. So we are aware of the risk and we are managing it. But we need more research to be more aware of it. And my last point is for Norway, the risk awareness process can be a bit weakened by we have something called the Naturskadeordningen as a compensation for damage and loss caused by natural damage. And it's a scheme that everyone pays and those affected get reimbursed. And the discussion going on in Norway is that, does that lead to lack of incentives for being aware of climate risk and preventing damage and also adapting to climate change? And I think I'll stop there, Karianne, and I'll come back to the challenges when it comes to risk analysis afterwards.
Great, thank you. Delphine, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this presentation. As you said, Group BPC is a cooperative bank, and we have regional banks all around France. And I am in the risk department and dedicated to climate risk. The interest part of our participation in the ClimInvest work is that we realize that the physical climate risk were taken into account in other countries in Europe, and that there was really room for taking into account this also in France, and not only in very faraway countries, but that was to be taken into account in France. And the recent occurrence of climate physical extreme conditions, flood and drought, point out the fact that we were right to look into it. So the way we organize our analysis on climate risk was almost from the beginning on the transition part and also on the physical part. We do realize that the information needed is very specific on the physical part, and that is why we learned from the ClimInvest initiative that we had to work with, as Romain mentioned, external providers and also a number of scientists to be able to increase our knowledge and the exposure of our assets on physical climate risk.
Yeah, that's fine for the introduction. Then we move to Dirk. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Dirk Welling. I sit in the responsible investment team from APG Asset Management. We invest the pension money for about 4.7 million Dutch citizens. And as a consequence, we have a really long-term view when it comes to the investment horizon. And of course, the returns we make do have an impact for quite a big group of the Dutch citizens. We work for 4 different pension funds within the responsible investment team, which consists of about more than 20 people. I'm focusing on the real estate investments, and as such also involved in all the investments we make from an ESG perspective, which includes also climate risk, of course. When it comes to climate risk, so far we make distinction between the transition risk, physical risk, of course. Transition risk, we have a science-based methodology in place, which is CRREM, and that will work perfectly going forward. When it comes to physical risk, over the past 2 years, we have worked together with CAS, so Climate Adaptation Services, as we wanted to better understand, let's say, the black boxes of the service providers in the market. We have developed a global asset level database, so we know for all the investments we make globally, about 46 billion euro in real estate, about more than 50,000 assets. We have now a better understanding of where are they located. And at the same time, it was a question of, okay, how can we assess the physical risks? So we teamed up with CAS and we reviewed 6 global data providers, and ultimately onboarded 2. And it would also be my advice, always onboard at least 2 data providers. We run, for example, also correlations among these different data providers. And what we, for example, see is that with flooding, the correlation between those data providers was 0 or even negative. And that triggered us also to reach out to the scientists, so to Delft University, VU University, etc. Because now going forward, having insight into the hazards and the exposure, there's still a big quest to improve the data quality, really understand what is what are the hazards in a specific location. And the next challenge is really to incorporate it in our underwriting and risk management. And that at different levels, at individual asset level, company level, etc., etc., etc.
Thank you, Dirk. So I guess if I ask you the next question, can science play a further role? I think you actually already answered it, like reaching out to Delft University and to others to detail it further. Do you have any further perspectives on that, on the idea of Kliminvest bringing scientists and investors together. Is there a next step needed?
Yeah, I think for us, because there's quite a gap, I think, between scientists and the investors. One of the articles recently published, I think you need somehow someone who's, let's say, the climate translator, or someone who can really help you to forecast what's going to happen, and you have to work with them. And yeah, ideally, the data should become available maybe through the government, and like in the Netherlands, the climate impact atlas is perfect. But for our global portfolio, yeah, we cannot. It's difficult to find in more than 60 countries. Where can we find the local climate impact atlas and combine all the data at the aggregated level? So scientists could help to unlock, let's say, data at a global scale, because just Europe is also for our portfolio not sufficient. 40% is invested in Europe and the remaining is outside Europe.
Okay, that's clear. I think you're actually referring to the Nature Climate Change article by Fiedler et al.
Yeah.
On the business risk and the emergence of climate analytics, not having only weather forecasters, but also climate forecasters. I think it's a very well written article. I think where both our communities can find the challenges to go forward. Caroline, just to step into the Norwegian situation, and that you mentioned your risk analysis, is there a role for science there? How are you integrating that in, for instance, loans, or how does that work for your bank, Sparabanken?
Yeah, absolutely. There is absolutely need for scientists, and maybe what has been mentioned a lot of times, getting scientific data and make it easy accessible for the financial sector, because we need it written in a simple way, not the scientific way, and easy accessible information, fast and easy to read, because the tempo is quite high. So there's no time in my bank for asking them, the advisors, to read long reports. They must have it very concrete. They must and they must know. I appreciate the effort of the Kliminvest to bridge research and finance, because they must buy that tool, because they must know, is this project situated right here? What is the climate risk in this area? So we need the data to be granular, both on a sectorial level and also on a geographic level, and to see that there is a risk of flooding in Norway. It's too broad. They need very granular data. So but one problem when it comes to risk analysis for us is what is the role of a bank? And I get that a lot from inside, because from inside the bank, from the advisors, because there is a nature assessment done by municipalities in Norway when it comes to giving permission, for example, to build in a certain area. And if a customer comes to us with a permission to build and present the nature climate risk assessment, it's very difficult for a bank and for an advisor in the bank to say, okay, I can see the risk assessment done by the municipality. I don't think it's good enough, because we don't have scientists. We don't have natural scientists. We have economists in the bank, and they have to rely on the competence and on the assessment done when there is a permission given by the municipalities. So that is a question that we're discussing a lot in the bank, and me participating in quite a lot of these kind of seminars. I know that there is a discussion in Norway whether the competence in the municipalities are good enough, and because we got small municipalities in Norway, and you've got the same person responsible for doing a climate risk assessment, and is it also responsible for sports? So is the competence good enough? And I think that's first and foremost a very important role for a natural scientist, to try to get the information that you have out to the people actually doing the climate risk analysis that we must in certain with most practical ways rely on.
So I hear you in a way say there's two gaps between the scientists and the financial sector, but also the scientists and the local communities to be bridged to fill. Yeah, great, yeah. Thank you. Delphine, your perspective in France, both on science, but also on this challenge of also the risk understanding at the local governance level. Is that the challenge for you as a cooperative bank?
Yes, exactly. And we have the same challenges than our colleague from Norway. And what she presented is exactly happening the same thing in France. And I would like to confirm that as a financial actor, we need input from the scientists, especially because they are on a prospective side of things in terms of physical climate risk. And the local authorities and even the local companies need additional information from the scientists. And I think the scientists do realize this need. And the future report of IPCC I think is really a concentration of a lot of scientists' input and that are going to be closer to the real activity of companies and individuals in our countries. In France, our national or public company for weather forecast, Météo France, has published a very recent report on regionalized consequences of physical climate risk. So it's a mix between weather forecast, which is different from the climate perspective, but they've issued a very regionalized tool where you could identify a specific address and see what is the climate perspective for those areas. And so this is really adapted to the to several regions in France where the climate hazard can be very different. Even if you speak about flood, it doesn't have the same reality in several regions of France, and I suppose that this is the same in other countries. So yes, scientists are very welcome to work with us, and I think they realize that we need information from them on a more concrete way to share with our clients, being companies, large or smaller companies.
Okay. Clear, thank you. Maybe just an additional question. We have some time, and actually also referring to this article that Derek also mentioned earlier. There is also the challenge brought up as to using climate risk, physical climate risk assessments to also building climate resilience. Maybe Derek, on you investing in real estate, there's an impact of physical climate risks on real estate and on your portfolio. But is there also a way of you creating impact on looking to climate resilience? Can you say a little bit about that from your side?
Yeah, you mean more the opportunities side, so the positive side of the equation. Yeah, we do invest. Let's say, for example, in the Afsluitdijk in the Netherlands. So there we see some investment opportunities, of course, but we have not completed our assessment yet, because to really conduct the good climate risk assessment, it also requires asset level data to understand, let's say, the vulnerability of each individual asset or a vulnerability of a different of a specific region. And that kind of information is not, let's say, in the quantitative models that are available in the market yet. If you would look at the physical risk in Manhattan, for example, yeah, I expect that that Manhattan will invest in certain defense mechanisms, but is it already captured into the quantitative models? So we need to have some further policy information, understanding what kind of resilience measures have been undertaken in a specific region or country or city. And that kind of information is not ready available yet. And yeah, like one of our investments that included 11 centers across Europe, they conducted their own physical risk assessment. And for the Netherlands, we had added also the Climate Impact Atlas, and we had our own 2 data providers. We had 4 different data providers for one asset. we saw four different outcomes. And yeah, then we had all the information on that specific asset, but still, what about the hazard? Is it, will it be a high risk or a low risk? So there's still plenty of information which is not there yet. And the risk of selecting a specific tool or selecting a tool is also a risk in itself. And so when you start to invest in resilience, be aware that you're also well informed. Yeah,
that's clear. Is that like from Norway perspective on also being aware of investing in climate resilience, a part of your analysis?
Yeah, I'll give a very, very concrete example of that. And that is also from our insurance company, a project and collaboration, which is a maintenance calendar that we want to use for the real estate, for our real estate customers. There is a lot of money in Norway going into refurbishing the houses, but it's mostly painting and new sofas inside, and we want to change the focus to maintenance of your house, and that has a climate risk. That is the reason why we're engaging in this project, because to make them more resilient, so to speak. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, interesting. And Delphine, in France, from your side?
Yes, in France, we could see that there are some discussion on local under local communities where some opportunities can raise in building some, let's say, seawall or some specific construction that can protect not only one building but a small village, and so the several stakeholders will have interest in sharing a global infrastructure project to protect a village, for instance. And so that is also, as a financial actor, especially as we have regional banks, this is a great opportunity to think together with our customers a global protection to make their building more resilient to climate physical risks.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's
to add to that.
Sure.
Resilience is one, but let's assume that the city or country will invest in more resilient, or to make a specific area more resilient. You also have to realize that from a physical risk assessment, that can still have an impact on, let's say, the returns for your real estate. Because often those kind of investments will probably be recouped through the property taxes. So also there, we when it comes to our underwriting, ultimately we really want to understand, okay, well, what's going on? Is it already reflected in the current market prices? Yes or no, etc., etc. So resilience is one, but when an area is protected in itself, it can still have an impact on the property returns, given the fact that the local municipality or so that will recoup the investment through the property taxes.
Okay, interesting. Anything to add from Norway and France on this? I think we're almost going to the last 10, 15 minutes of the seminar.
I want to add an interesting project that has been going on nationally in Norway, and that can be useful for a lot of for other countries, and it's presented in the World Bank, their database, and that's insurance loss data. It's an insurance loss data sharing project for municipalities. So the idea is that all the insurance companies in Norway share information about natural damage loss and where they have had payments for natural damages, and that information gets to the municipalities and can strengthen their maps, because actually the insurance companies maps over natural disasters in Norway, and the maps that the municipalities and the regional and the national authorities had, they didn't map. So the maps could be strengthened by seeing where actually do we have payments because of insurance payments because of natural damage. And that's the whole idea behind the project, is to strengthen the municipalities' ability to climate resilience ahead of a natural disaster.
Okay, to get a better idea of what happened in the past to inform better decisions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, maybe you could share later on maybe the title of the project if other people are interested who are listening in.
Yeah, I could share it in the chat later.
Yeah, thank you. And then Delphine or Dirk, I would like to, I think, move to the final point. I think we already saw a list of challenges mentioned by Romain that Climinvest identified. But for you, your company, the country, maybe even, what do you see as remaining challenges for the financial sector on integrating fiscal climate risks in mainstreaming financial assessments? What do you see? Is it all solved in 5 years? It's all set in stone? What do you see as challenges on the way ahead? Maybe Dirk first?
Yeah, the biggest challenge will be to incorporate it in your in the underwriting. So and try to understand whether it's already reflected in the current valuations of assets, yes or no. And we invest around megatrends. Climate change is one of the 5 megatrends we see. It's really in the long term also thinking, where do people want to live, shop, work, and spend their leisure time. That will have a kind of an impact, and that is really short term. Probably many things will be insured, so it's in your OPEX already reflected. But in the long term, then is the question: okay, how will certain real estate markets respond to this, and where is it already reflected? The smart buyers will incorporate it, but then the question is really in the long term, how will it play out?
And do you take into account also like the current pandemic situation in such outlooks?
Of course, that's the current pandemic. Also, there we have our views how that will, how we think that will play out in the long term, of course. And of course, there we also have some investments which will be hit by the pandemic, and others that were quite stable. But when it comes to climate risk, yeah, also the transition risk will be a very big, maybe in the short term, because till 2040 there won't be many differences between the two scenarios. When you look at the RCP scenario, till 2040 there's not so much difference. So everyone is in the same boat. But before 2040, you will see maybe the transition risk. So governments who will step up with more stringent legislation. And that's why we will be prepared to incorporate everything and understand whether assets are performing above or below the grant pathways. So short term, it's more transition risk probably.
Yeah, okay. And Delphine, from your side, is it similar challenges that Dirk sketched, or something completely different for your bank or your?
Well, we have quite some similarities, but I would like to say that it will take several years for us to really be able to say that we do manage very easily the physical climate risk. Because of the data, and that has been said several times. And also, as my colleague from Norway mentioned, on the insurance side, you have an insurance policy that you pay usually for 1 year, but as a bank, we finance real estate for 10 to 15 years, maybe more. And so the insurance will change their price according to the weather or the flood and the drought. So the risk is really in the hand of the banks. So that's why we need to invest in climate data information platform, as it was mentioned, to anticipate, and that's the role of the risk department, to anticipate the risks that will probably occur in the future, and we can see that the future can be sometimes very close, and then I don't think we should wait until 2040. but some things can happen in the next few years, and we've experienced this in France, but not France metropolitan, but in the Caribbean, when a hurricane disappeared, where all our assets disappeared, being our banking branch or our clients, from the individual to the large corporate, being a hotel in the Caribbean. So it does happen. So we have to be prepared. And so I'd like to thank all the Climvest and Cicero team for our working together.
Thank you. Caroline, any remarks on final challenges or remaining challenges you see?
Not much to add to the others. I think they covered well the challenges coming in the next years. We need more projects like the Climvest. We need collaboration, like I was mentioning, between municipalities, local authorities, and insurance companies and researchers. We need more collaboration, and we need projects like you've done, the Climvest, to really get out to practitioners. And I think often with these good projects, they end when today with the closing seminar, we actually need further projects to really get the knowledge out there to the people sitting and doing the climate risk assessments on the ground. And I think that will be a main challenge in the coming years.
Great, thank you. Any last comments, Dirk, Delphine, or Colleen? Then I think we...
Well, what would be helpful for us as a global investor is that there would be one website where we can find per country the best tool or the best data. If someone has, let's say the Google of climate risk, so if you can find the best data source per country, yeah, that would already be very helpful. So I trust that there will be some participants, some smart scientists.
I'm now writing down your notes.
Then feel free to reach out to us.
Okay, that's clear.
The same wish here.
You adhere all of that. Okay, well, we see you next project. We'll all call you. Great. I think given the time and also seeing the participants leaving or the numbers going down a bit, I would suggest we close. I would hereby like to close the panel discussion. Thank you, Caroline, Delphine, and Dirk for your contributions. I just have the final slides with our contacts. Again, if you're interested in reaching out, let me just put it up. Oh, it's there. Yeah. Again, so if you're interested in outputs, I think several have been mentioned. We have the capstone report, etc. You can go to the Climvest website where there's all the links available, or contact one of the partners. I would thank again the panelists, all the presenters, and all the participants for being here. And as mentioned, we will be sharing the recording with you. So if your other colleagues would be interested to listen to what we discussed today, you can share that with them. I would say thank you for now, and have a nice day, and hope to see you somewhere in another project or challenge as just posed again. Thank you. Bye.